Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box. So it was on this day that one of the most consequential albums of the 80s was released in the year 1984. Ooh, spooky. Of all years. Now, this was Frankie Goes to Hollywood's Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. And the album was really a breakthrough for so many reasons. Number one, there's the production, and many people have called Trevor Horn the producer of the 80s. And insofar as whether it was sort of, whether you call it synth pop, the dance music of the 80s, the neo romantics, the post punk, or just the pop music of the 80s, Trevor Horn had his hands on everything. I would argue that between Peter Gabriel and his innovations at the end of the 70s and Trevor Horn, between the two of them, you really do get that production sound of the 80s. And even though Peter Gabriel was using it for his sort of experimental progressive music, and Trevor Horn tended to use it, well, in some progressive music, but more often than not in danceable pop music. This style of production trickled not down, but out into the styles of soul and R&B, into rock, and even into heavy metal, and even into jazz production in many ways. The very clean but sort of brassy metallic drum sound that you get from gated reverb or the use exclusively of electronic drums. Um, the very much strong emphasis of synths high up in the mix, guitars as they are traditionally understood, less prominent apart from, of course, the rock genres. But in the pop world, the guitar wasn't meant to sound like the guitar in the 80s, and the bass was louder than ever, more fretless than you would expect in some cases, and very frequently slapped. But of course, the kind of slapping that we associate with this album is rather less PG-13. But we'll get to that in a moment. So the album had that great production. It also had great songwriting because the guys in the band really knew how to write catchy songs, infectiously catchy. And every single song on the album, you could really say, had those attributes. There were a couple covers, an unexpected Bruce Springsteen cover, Born to Run, but it was really the stuff that they wrote. Well, whether it was Welcome to the Pleasure Dome or to Tribes, that was absolutely sort of infectious and anthemic on the dance floor. But it was Relax that, of course, made the band huge. Now, that song became huge for a number of reasons. One, it had a refrain that everyone could sing, relax, don't do it. Two, it's something that comes in handy in a lot of situations. If you want to give the finger to the guy on the road who looks like he's going to cannibalize you, best to relax, don't do it. Of course, when they were talking about relaxing and not doing it, they were talking about a very, how shall we say, biological. I'm because I mean YouTube is just full of censorship. I shouldn't have said that. They're talking about relaxing the flow of blood to a particular organ to which, when blood flows, it's capable of performing certain activities. There, I'm back down from PG-13 into the PG category. So. It was because of that, while it was a hit in much of the world, the BBC banned it on air. The DJs, as he said, "Oh, we won't have any of that," because it was, we all know what it's about. But on a serious note, the album was relevant because it was one of the most openly gay musical statements of the time. Of course, there were sort of people like Tom Robinson who were more underground talking about that sort of thing. There were bands like Queen who were, riddled with double entendre, but never just sort of coming out with it. There were bands like Judas Priest, who no one associated with the LGBT movement, where Rob Halford obviously was a gay man, but that only came to sort of the overt public knowledge later on. And while Frankie Goes to Hollywood didn't necessarily come out and say it was so obvious that everybody knew, and it was That's a historic moment. The album also is very well known for featuring a lot of good musicians on it, including Steve Howe of Yes. He played the acoustic guitar section of Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. And of course, Steve Howe got to know Trevor Horn because Trevor was also a producer of Yes in the 80s and was briefly a member of Yes, some would say against his will. I think that the album really holds up because whenever an album has a sound that's emblematic of a particular era, there are two questions you need to ask yourself. One, is it produced well? Or two, is it produced just to copy what was going on? And in this case, it wasn't a copycat. This was an innovator. And so if you want to hear what the 80s sounded like, among other things, because there wasn't just one 80s sound, but this was certainly one of the biggest. Put on this album and you'll go, ah, so that's what it was like when, you had it was an interesting era. You had Frankie Goes to Hollywood and Ronald Reagan all in the same decade, and everyone seemed to be happy. Now no one's happy. My, how things have changed. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.